Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. So I'm a little at a loss of how to title the video that we're doing today, or like frame the idea in a way that clearly communicates what I'm trying to get at. Basically, we're talking today about books that I think are in the wrong genre, or at least are marketed with the wrong genre expectations. And as a result of that, I either would not have picked the book up if I knew what it was, or I would have liked the book better if I had known what it actually was going to be like. So I don't know what I've ended up titling this, because I've written it, like I've tried a few different, and I'm like, I don't know how to communicate that concisely. But basically these are books where I was like, oh, okay, I'm in the mood for a whodunit. And then when I started reading it, and like the back of it sold it as like, this is, you know, who killed so-and-so, let's find out. And then you get into it and you're like, oh no, this is actually a thriller where, you know, yeah, somebody dies, but that's not really the main focus of the story. It's more like a domestic suspensey kind of thing or something like that. And sometimes when that happens, I'm delighted by not having my expectations met. And sometimes I'm not. Most of the times not. And I think the real problem here is sometimes I think the marketing departments or like the publicity departments at publishers know that X is a trend or that X has a certain reader appeal to it. And so they will try to make the Y book fit into that X category. And I think that really can backfire in some big ways if somebody is expecting a specific type of book and then you kind of do a bait and switch with them on it. So sometimes it's that. And then sometimes I think books just sort of either defy genre categorization or they're pushing the boundaries of what a specific genre can do. And I don't know, I guess that could be a whole other video about if that's good or bad. Like, I think that can be fine, but I do think it's important then for the back copy to kind of communicate to you in some way that this isn't gonna totally be what a typical like genre romance is, for example. So anyway, maybe this will make more sense once we start getting into examples, but I thought we could talk today about books that weren't what I was expecting, and I think like suffered in my estimation often because of it. Where to start? Let's maybe start with a few nonfiction picks. That might be fun. So the first one I had on here is Let Us Now Praise Famous Men by James Agee. And this is an example of like kind of pushing the boundaries of genre convention. So this book, I was expecting kind of like a groundbreaking journalistic take on white sharecroppers in the early 20th century. I was expecting it to be a classic like reportage kind of book. And this book is beautifully written. I mean, James Agee's prose is just like very lyrical and a very specific stylistic choice. And I think in retrospect, also kind of postmodern. I think in this book, he is really playing with what it means to even have some sort of accurate reporting or to even try to tell somebody else's story. I think that it's interesting in that respect, but because I was expecting a more like to learn more straightforwardly about the plight of the sharecropper in the South, I felt like it ended up really detracting from the voices of the people he was supposed to be documenting. I also think that gets a little dicey in this specific case because these are really like poor people who I think deserve to have a voice. And so it just made me feel really conflicted the whole time I was reading it, because I just felt like the prose was more appropriate for some sort of literary fiction, but the content was like a really serious nonfiction topic. And I felt like the beauty of the prose was compromising the integrity of the nonfiction part of it. So I just was really, probably that's like me not knowing enough about the book going into it, but that one like really let me down. And I wish that it hadn't really been positioned as being nonfiction, or like not that kind of nonfiction, I guess. How to Date Men When You Hate Men. So I love that title. And I was expecting from that title and from the kind of description on the back of the book that it was gonna be sort of like a bunch of essays musing on like the difficulties of being a feminist and like having awareness of the patriarchy and being straight as a woman, and men always be on their bullshit, and you've got to kind of figure out what you're going to do about that. I was hoping that's more what it was, and it ended up being much more of a memoir and not a very well done memoir. Like, I didn't really find much about this to like. And I really wish that we could get, like, that title I think is fantastic. And I think the kind of idea that that title communicates could make for a great collection of thoughtful essays. And this book just wasn't that. It was like a memoir and not a very good memoir. Sex and the City and Us. So I thought that this was going to be, and again, from the back cover, I thought this was going to be like reflecting on the cultural relevance or like contributions of Sex and the City to popular culture, which is a genre that I love. But actually it really ended up being more of an oral history of the show itself. And I enjoy that show, I mean, complicatedly, but I definitely have appreciation for like what it did in the history of TV and whatever, like it's a whole thing I would have really enjoyed reading a book about. But this really just ended up sort of being an oral history. So I didn't have like a bad time in this, and I think it was a pretty good version of that, but that wasn't really what I was expecting based on the way it was pitched. Those were all the nonfiction ones, so maybe we'll just run through all these other fiction ones in no particular order. The Honey Don't List by Christina Lauren. This is women's fiction with a romantic element in it, and Christina Lauren traditionally writes romances. So this ended up, and actually, you know what? Let's just group all three of these together. The Honey Don't List, Real Men Knit by Kawana Jackson, and A Taste of Sage by Yafa Santos. All three of these are books that were pitched as genre romance. And all three of these are books that I don't think worked as genre romance and work better as women's fiction. And I think in some cases should have just had the romantic element completely removed. Actually, in two of these cases, just don't even try to make it a romance. So The Honey Don't List is really, really well written. It's very fun. The banter is interesting. The characters are well developed and interesting. And I could have read a different kind of book about all of these characters very happily. But the problem is it's meant to be a genre romance, and there is not nearly enough time and care, attention given to the romance in that book. So it just, that piece of it completely was the least successful part of it, and it's what I came to the book to read. So that was so disappointing. And actually I see that their next release is just very straightforwardly being pitched as women's fiction. So I think that's the direction they're wanting to move in, which is fine, but I think they need, the transition I think is going to be hard, because I think they want to include some of those romance elements that they've kind of emerged from, like that genre tradition, but it doesn't feel very satisfying as genre romance what they're doing. A genre romance needs to have a sufficient amount of time and attention on the page given to the development of the relationship. It can't just be like 80% of the book is more like a workplace drama with romantic elements thrown in. Oh, all of a sudden it's a romance, and in the last 5% we're going to try to make that work. Like, that just doesn't feel satisfying as a genre romance. Similarly, I would say A Taste of Sage does something very akin to this, and I think it would have been served not really trying to be a genre romance and just going for being women's fiction. This is much more straightforwardly a chick lit kind of thing, with a heavy emphasis on the heroine's career and her development in the workplace. And I think it should have just been that. It tries to set up the romantic piece of it about 50 to 60% of the way through, and it just doesn't ring true, because it's meant to be like enemies to lovers, but it just hasn't had enough build up. All of a sudden, like, they're in love and you don't really know where it came from. It also on the back advertises that there's this like kind of magical realism part of the plot, but that doesn't come in until like 80% of the way through. So just like both in terms of its genre and in terms of the specific plot elements that are described on the back, I just think this one ends up letting people down because it's not setting up the right expectations about the kind of book you're going to read. And then for Real Men Knit, I will say that this one is, I think, of these three, the closest to an actual, like, fulfilling the terms of genre romance. And I should say, the reason I keep coming back to this, one of the fundamental parts of genre romance is that the main conflict, or one of the two main conflicts, like if it's a romantic suspense, there can also be a mystery plot. If it's a romantic fantasy, there can also be like a fantasy plot, whatever. But one of the two main conflicts must be these two people getting together. It can't be like a side plot. Real Men Knit, I would say, does have the people getting together as the main plot. So in that sense, I guess it is successful. But one of the other pieces of a successful genre romance is that of course the characters learn and grow, but you have to be like really rooting for them to get together, or else it doesn't end up feeling very satisfying. And I think the downside here is that Kawana Jackson built up this really interesting family full of interesting and complicated male characters. And the one that she picked as the first hero in what clearly is going to be a series has a lot of learning and growth he needs to do. Now, and in like kind of a typical like family drama, that would be great, that would be fine. But in this case, because one of his main functions in the plot is that he needs to be getting together with this other character who we really like and who's really, you're rooting for her, she is a friend of the family, she's just great. He has such a long way to go in his development for you to feel like she's not kind of getting the short end of the stick and ending up with this guy. If it was a story about him, you know, kind of learning from the death of his mother and like growing in his sense of what family really means and it could have been great. But because it's supposed to be a romance, I spent the whole time being like, but I don't really want you to get together with this woman because she's so great and you're still kind of an immature jerk. Like, you got a long way to go, buddy. So in that sense, I felt like if it had been sold as like a family drama with like a strong romantic side plot, maybe that could have been reshaped into a stronger book overall. Okay, I think those were the only romances, so now we'll go a couple of mysteries. So first, The Last by Hannah Jameson. Now, this is one I actually ended up quite liking. I gave this 4 stars, and I put this on my best mystery thriller of 2019 list. I ended up really liking this. I do think, though, it was like very misleadingly marketed because it is marketed as a whodunit at this like isolated Swiss hotel in the middle of a nuclear apocalypse. Like, that's how it was positioned, as sort of an Agatha Christie in the middle of a nuclear dystopia. And that's not really what this is. This is really more just like a straightforward post-apocalyptic thriller, maybe. There is a murder that you do get some resolution to, but that piece of the story is by far the weakest. It's much more a character study and sort of like a slow thrillery kind of thing. And I think it's a good book, like it's a good version of that. I wish that they had just aligned the marketing better, because the people I saw who did not enjoy this specifically were very let down by the mystery component of it. And I think if they hadn't been expecting a mystery component or like a whodunit bit as much, they may not have been as disappointed with the book overall. So I think that was a real marketing fail in terms of a very good book with, I think, kind of deceptive marketing. Then The Witch Elm. This is, and I think maybe this is how Tana French's books are in general, and this book helped me like concretize something. This book I don't think is a mystery, which is how it is sold. I think it is a literary thriller with a heavy dose of a mystery element to it. And that is a subtle distinction, like a literary mystery versus literary fiction with mystery elements to it. I know that that's a subtle distinction, but to me, a literary mystery still is going to have a very satisfying whodunit bit to it. It's still going to be kind of putting the whodunitness first, but it's also going to have like beautiful prose and well-developed characters and like a theme, things like that. And that I enjoy. I've realized that often literary fiction with just like a mystery plot kind of thrown in isn't always my favorite. And I think if I'd realized that this wasn't very much of a whodunit, despite how it is described, I don't know that I would have picked it up. Now, Tana French's writing is absolutely fantastic. I could not put this down, even though I only ended up giving it 3 stars. I do think that it's not very satisfying if you are a mystery reader looking for a mystery. So I don't know. I can see why this ended up kind of not getting very good ratings, I think, from a lot of mystery readers, because that piece of it is not very successful, I don't think. Next, I had Orient by Christopher Bolin on here, and this is another one that I think is very similar to The Witch Elm. I think it was sort of like a literary thrillery kind of thing that I was expecting to be like a real mystery, and I think I didn't even finish this one because I just was not into it. But it definitely was not mystery forward. And I guess it is tricky in some of these books that I guess have a mystery plot, but are not genre mystery per se. It's kind of tricky. The same way that I guess you can get into that situation with romance where like there's a romantic element, but it is not a genre romance. I think it can be hard, and I think publishers, when they're figuring out the marketing, whenever there's a mystery or romance element in there, they need to, I think it behooves them to be clear on what level that is at in the book. And if you set up the expectation that something is a mystery and then it's not really, it's just disappointing. And that's how I felt with this book. I just didn't feel like it was like a thriller, a mystery. It was like a literary book with a mystery thriller component kind of just tossed in there. The Passage by Justin Cronin. The way people talked about this book was that it was a literary vampire novel. And it's not. Like, I just straight up don't even really see where people get that from. Like, we'll leave the literary to the side because I think I'm on the record of saying I don't think that the prose is anything that exciting. But the vampire bit, I think, is like a real stretch. And I don't think that it's a very good expectation to set up with prospective readers that that is what this book is. Let's even just say it's literary. I'll grant you that. It's, I think, much more accurately described as a literary, like, dystopia, post-apocalyptic kind of thing. I guess technically the speculative element you could think of as being vampires, but it is not, they are not vampires in the kind of traditional sense of that word. I don't know, I just think I was expecting to get some badass vampires in this book, and I just don't think I ever really got that itch scratched. So it was just disappointing. It was disappointing for a number of reasons, but among them, I wanted vampires, and I don't feel like I really got like what was promised to me. Then we have Sadie, which I think is actually really good. Like, this is a book I would recommend, but the thing that I really disagree with is people talking about this as if it is YA. I just don't think it is. I think the protagonist is too old for it. I don't think thematically this is a YA book. And it is really violent. Like, it is really violent. And frankly, I would much rather give a teen something that is sexually explicit rather than something that is violent. And I guess I mean that in the sense of like a young teen. Like The Hunger Games, to be honest, I would hesitate to give that to even like a 12 or 13-year-old, even though it is, I think that is YA. Because of how violent it is, I don't know, maybe that just says something about my values, but I just don't love the idea of giving teens, something that is marketed to teens in particular, something that is so violent. And this was very, very violent. So I guess my problem with this one is that it continues to be talked about as if it is YA, and I genuinely just don't really see it. I know other people who feel like it is rightfully a part of YA, and I guess I just don't really find those arguments persuasive. That is how the publisher published it. I think that's what the author intended, but it's a very good book. Like, it's a very, very good book. And if it were not marketed as YA per se, I would feel more comfortable recommending it more widely, if that makes any sense. So I guess if you're looking for like a really intense story about children being victimized and hurt and like murder and stuff like that, you know, it's really intense and I think really well done. And it also has like this true crime podcast element to it, which I think is an interesting like narrative bit. Like, this is a very well executed book. I just feel really, I guess I think about like, so my niece will be 12 next year. And I just can't imagine handing this to her. And in my mind, that's kind of what I think about, is that YA, to my mind, should start, like, often starts getting read by 12, 13-year-olds. So I don't know. I just can't imagine handing her this book and her being ready for it. I mean, like, she still gets scared by parts of Harry Potter. So I don't know. Anyway, maybe that's just me being an old fogey and not understanding what the kids can deal with these days. But that just is hard for me to conceptualize as a YA book. Go Set a Watchman by Harper Lee. So this is a book that I think if it had been edited a bit more and made a short story would have been excellent. I think leaving it in its extant form was a mistake, and I think marketing it as a book was a mistake. Like, I really wish that they had just made that like a really well-edited, tight, short story, and I think it could have been excellent. But I think because it's like a complicated publishing history and has like a lot of interesting questions it raises about authors' rights and people trying to exploit authors or artists in general in their older years for their creative property. Like, it raises a lot of interesting questions, but in terms of like the book itself and not like the morality around publishing the book, I think it would have been better served by being edited down to a short story, letting it be a better piece of art and not just sort of a literary historical oddity. I don't know. The 10th Girl. This I can't say much about. I will just say that this is sold as a YA mystery. and I do not think that this is a YA mystery. I can say no more beyond that because it would be too difficult to not give you spoilers, but I think this book raises such interesting questions about how you market things to the right audience, because I completely understand why they felt like they had to market this as a YA mystery. Me and my friend Bethany at Beautifully Bookish Bethany had a long, we read this as a buddy read and had like a good like book club about this one, and we were like going back and forth about like, what do you, like, how do you get this book in the right hands of the people who are really going to enjoy it? Because if you're like me, if you're a reader like me who is looking for a YA mystery, I don't think this is going to make you feel very good. But there is a huge group of people who I think would love this. So it's very frustrating because I can't really give you more information to guide those of you who I think would like this to this particular book. But I do think that the publisher was in a difficult marketing position, and I think the choices that they were forced to make it so that it inevitably is going to find its way in the hands of some people who are not going to enjoy it. And finally, Inspection by Josh Malerman. So, this is a book that I think is marketed as if it is a specific kind of dystopia and is marketed in a specific, like, how the back cover basically doesn't reflect the actual knowledge of the characters. Like, you are led to believe that the characters do or don't know X, Y, and Z, when in fact they do or don't know ABC, which is actually, that's a funny, the use of letters in that situation for this book is funny. But anyway, and I think because of that, I was expecting one type of horror book and got a different one. And I think that there's also just some plot holes in this one, but I think that the back copy of this particular book really misleads you about what the characters do or don't know about the dystopian world that they're in a way that I found annoying. And I wish the book had actually been what was described on the back rather than what that book actually ended up being. Okay, so there you go. Those are books in the wrong genre, marketed weirdly, marketed in a way that the right readers are not finding them sometimes. I don't know what I'm going to end up calling this, but that's my list of books that kind of fit that general idea. Let me know what you think. Do you disagree with me on any of the ones I mentioned in terms of feeling like books do fit into a certain genre better than I seem to think that they do? Do you have any examples of ones that you feel like were marketed weird or not in the right genre? Let me know in the comments down below. And yeah, I think that will do it for now. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.